thanks for coming. So I have an interesting title, as everybody can see, looking for power in all the wrong places. The grid today, we talk about it's out of power. The reality is the grid has a lot more power than people think. The question is, how do we use that power and how do we get to it? And we'll start with the problem of what's happening on the grid and why the grid is running needs power. So in your house is the easiest example to use for people. You use an average of about 1.5 kilowatts of power an hour at your home, but you buy a 20 kilowatt generator from Generac to power your home in an outage. And that's to solve this problem, which is these peak loads that are happening on the grid. That peak load gets further amplified in an industrial load, and at the current AI data centers, in 1/10 of a second or 10 milliseconds, a 25x increase happens from GPU chips. So if you have 5 megawatts running, you now have 25 megawatt bursts that are going up and down. And this is the power problem that the grid of the 21st century is not built for. We're trying to take the grid of the 20th century and apply it to the 21st century, and that's not the wave of the future of how we should be building the grid. And I'll use the example of a Formula One compared to a daily driver. The daily driver is the 20th century grid. We run around in a car, it's pretty fuel economy, it's been very inexpensive, and we love it. Unfortunately, we need a Formula One now because of what the power constraints are and what's happening to the grid. And when you think about a Formula One, these are just simple comparisons. Much more efficiency is needed on the power generation side. How do we cut our costs? It's through efficiency of using the power. The amount of downforce is like, how do I make sure the power can be there when I need it? What are the constraints associated with that? When you think about G-forces for braking and cornering, that's equivalent to what's happening in an AI data center with GPU chips that are going off and on like popcorn in these 25x amplifications. The reality is it's coming to the other pieces that we just talked about, to residential and industrial as well. As we bring robotics online, as we bring EVs online, we got a little bit of a reprieve because of those, right? So what is taking years, 100 years to build can actually fail in milliseconds. If you blink your eye, that's 500 milliseconds. Current switchgear on the grid today runs in 20 to 50 milliseconds. So you could have 100 things happen on the grid in the time it takes you to blink your eye. That grid stability is what we're losing. Add to that, we're taking renewables and putting on the grid. If you go back to the example of the sports car, we have this thing called inertia. As we put renewables on the grid, we're taking inertia off the grid. That's compounding the problem. So this millisecond issue, which is a ride-through issue, right? The ride-through issue is how we solve problems on the grid. Today, anybody in this industry who's doing this for a while knows we call it an infinite bus. The infinite bus is being depleted every time we put renewables on the grid, every time we shut down coal, every time we shut down spinning assets. Those spinning assets today create inertia that allows us to ride through these grid conditions of what's going on and what's happening. So it's not that we shouldn't be using renewables, but we have to build a grid that uses renewables in a fashion that doesn't take the grid down. What's the example of that? Everybody's familiar with the Spain incident, Iberia. What happened there? 355 megawatts went offline in 20 to 50 milliseconds because of a fault. 1.5 seconds later, half the grid was down. 5 seconds total, the entire grid was down. Does anybody know how often our AMI meters that we spent millions of dollars on reads on the grid? 15-minute intervals, uploaded 2 to 3 times a day. Does that sound like a safety net? I think that's Houston, we have a problem, right? So if you think about what's happening on the grid today, our ability to forecast the future and our ability to stop these incidents, it does not exist. We are living in a false impression that the utility can protect us from outages. The reality is what's happening with renewables is taking inertia off the grid, and the utility infrastructure is not fast enough to solve this problem. So we're continuing to add to this. When we have all these 500 kV lines that I'm just watching that people are trying to install and run them 150 miles, and you have 5x the capacity on the grid than you have in load to solve these problems, that is not a solution for the 21st century. And the EV market, if you think about the EVs, where we were a few years ago, what was the concern? $7 billion of infrastructure to charge EVs. Now we spent very little. EVs have kind of subsided and we're getting into, well, we maybe need some better technology because we want to go more than 300 miles on a charge and all these kind of things. That's all going to be solved. I will guarantee you solid state batteries and other things will solve, and we'll have 500 mile EVs before 2030. That's just a reality. That means we are then going to charge cars. We're going to charge them at home. That's going to take that 5x number and it's going to jack it way up. So now we're going to take that little transformer that sits on the pole outside of your house that typically feeds 3 homes, it's not going to have enough power. The power to charge your car fast is equivalent to putting a massive air conditioner, turning it on. And that's still not the fastest charger. When you think about fast EV charging like a Tesla and stuff, you're talking about putting 10 homes to charge your car. When you start thinking about 200 kW on a house that averages 1.5, that's 200 times, 100 times the power needed to charge your car in a fast application. Those are the numbers that we all are comfortable with what the utility has done for us for 100 years. And that grid was built for incandescent light bulbs and light duty. We are beyond light duty and incandescent light bulbs. We are into very sophisticated, high-end electronics. And in the new statement I have that I tell people is, if you don't think energy security is an issue, then you better start selling lemonade for cash on the corner. Because everything else needs power, and you're using computers to do that, computer processing, robotics, digital information, which is all fast, high consumption equipment. So the reality is, data centers aren't breaking the grid, they're exposing the problem. They're exposing it because of their growth and the amount of power that they need instantaneously. The EV market started this, and we don't talk about the EV market, but trust me, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I was having discussions with Shell and many others about how are we solving the EV charging. And how did we try and solve the EV charging? Software. Anyone who has a Tesla, goes to a Tesla charging site knows, if 5 cars are there, I'm gonna be sitting a lot longer than if no cars are there. Because they're just spreading the load. So the solution wasn't to solve the electron problem, the solution was take software and just make you wait longer. That's part of the success that failed for the EV market. Because we can't figure out how to charge a car in less than 20 minutes, and because the mileage is less than 300, the adoption rate is pretty low. Because people can't afford a $100,000 daily driver in mass. If you get that cost of $40,000 or $50,000 and you can charge that car in 10 minutes, we will see a much larger adoption rate in EV. And I'm not a proponent of either way, people can choose what they want, but I have an EV, I have a hybrid, and I have a gas truck, a diesel truck. I like all 3 of them. They have different applications, I use them for different things. So this exposure, this traditional versus a large campus versus an AI campus, is effectively what is being exposed on the grid of these load and what's happening on the grid. So here's our report card since 2001 on the grid. Do we think the 20th century application is working? In 25 years of investment on the grid, trying to do what we did the last 100 years, we have had 0 impact on the grid. As a matter of fact, I think we have our head in the sand to solve the problem, because the current infrastructure with tariffs and how the grid works makes innovation almost impossible. Because you can't go behind the meter, you now are required to have this utility infrastructure solve the problem, and they've spent a lot of money staying out of court systems so that they have no liability for what happens behind the meter. That's created a fundamental problem to fix the grid. If the problem is behind the meter and the utility can't go behind the meter, how does the utility fix the problem? They just keep piling more on the same crap they have been doing for 100 years. But it doesn't fix the problem. They're actually spending a lot of money. You want to know why your utility bills are going up? This is what's been spent in that time period. 2023 was before the AI boom of data centers. Politically, we hear everybody saying data centers are causing this rise of utility rates in the US. This money was spent without the data center boom. By the way, utility rates in PJM are auctioned off 3 years in advance. The pricing you saw this year was done 2 years ago. So that rise in prices on PJM and in these marketplaces is not coming from the AI data centers. You haven't seen that price yet. It hasn't hit. It's coming. PJM said they're 8 gigs short on power. That means they're going to buy it from somebody else and import it. Anytime you buy it from somebody else, ask Europe how LNG works. LNG right now is through the roof in Europe because of Iran. Anybody know what West Texas current rates are for natural gas? Minus $9 an MMBTU. Because the Texas Railroad Commission said we can't flare anymore, the EPA wants us to capture this. Because it's $100 a barrel for oil, we're pumping oil like there's no tomorrow. The natural gas has to be captured. We're not using it fast enough. So we have an inverse relationship now of natural gas to energy. We actually could be doing free power in West Texas at minus $9 an MMBTU if all the factories were there. If all the data centers were there, they would be running for free. That's the reality. By the way, this isn't just unique to natural gas. We have the same problem in California and Texas on PV and wind. Right? When PV is working, we are at minus prices in California. And we have legislation that says you have to use it all. And California has cap and trade to add on to that. So when you're adding these constituencies in there, we now have negative prices on PV during the day. If we had a follow the sun model of trading, you could actually have zero cost of energy in the United States. If we did all paper trades. That's how ridiculous the infrastructure that we built with the tariff system is compared to where we're going in the 21st century. The person who pays the most, unfortunately, is the residential person. So if you don't like it now, just wait. According to the EIA, we're going to be 100 times worse. Today, the average in the US is 1.5 outages per year for 2 hours. I live in Florida. We have a little bit more than that, but that's the average. 100 times that. Are we ready for 200 outages a year? Are you ready for 200 hours of outages a year? That's what they're predicting. So you think we have a problem now? Wait. By 2030, this is going to be disaster content. And I say to people, what's your mission critical? Because we talk about mission critical for data centers, but we don't talk about mission critical for the residential guy, the small business guy, and all these people. But when we get to 100 times the outage problem in 2030, everyone will say, I have a mission critical problem. My life doesn't work anymore without power. It doesn't. We can all kid ourselves and think we're going to live in the woods and have campfires, but that's not the reality of the way things work. We are going to live in a disaster. So I say energy is abundant and power is not. And why do I say that? Here's the stat that everyone should burn in their head. 1,250 gigawatts of grid generation in the United States alone. We average 470 gigawatts every hour. Our largest peak ever last summer was 759 gigawatts. Why do we think we're out of power? We're not out of power. We're out of producing power in the right spot when we need it. The storm Uri a few years ago in Texas was 30 gigawatts of power got lost. If there's 1,250 gigawatts, you wouldn't think a problem as small as 30 gigawatts would take a whole state down, would you? But that's the reality of how the transmission distribution system in the United States for the 20th century will fail us in the 21st century. It doesn't work like that anymore. This system needs fixed. If we take the 1,250 gigawatts of generation today, not one more power plant needs built. That's a sobering fact. So we're all going to pay for all this generation to solve a power problem, even though energy is abundant on our grid. So the question is, how do we become more efficient with our power? Not we need more energy, because it's two different discussions. And unfortunately, it's a nuanced conversation when a utility says, I need more power. The actuality is they're saying, I need more energy to solve a power problem. And it's not the same thing. But we all go home every day and we have our air conditioning or heat on and we turn our lights on and off. We use our stoves and all these wonderful things, and we don't think about power. This is a very complicated industry. Gas is traded 5 times before you use it, right? There's all these things going on in the marketplace. So what we did at E2 was really design a system meant for power and meant for energy efficiency. So if you take this instant deliverable power, we've decided to converge the Edison and Westinghouse concepts. The grid is built on Westinghouse. If anybody doesn't know the history, he won the AC battle 100 plus years ago, and we said, hey, it's best to do power, long transmission, distribution, and to the end customer. 100 years, that has sufficed us excellent, and we've had the cheapest power in the world. We built the industrial complex in the United States because we were first to market and we took advantage of that. However, today, that doesn't fit what we need. We now need power close to the source, which was the Edison complex, right? Edison said if we have power closest to the source, it is the most reliable and the cheapest power source. So the question is, how do you build this long-term power solution that we've been developing for 100 years and use it with the behind-the-meter system to make sure we fix these efficiency and power problems without building more grid infrastructure? How do we combine that together? Well, it's going to take years for the bureaucracy to catch up with what's going on in the grid. So today, you're seeing this whole system take place of bring your own power, right? And bring your own power is Pandora's box for the utilities. Because we had a president who now says the utilities should build their own power, it's equivalent to what Bill Clinton did with the telephone industry. He said, we're going to separate cellular from copper wires. Bell has never recovered. Cellular took over and the copper wire went away 40 years later. Power is on the same trajectory. In 40 years, the utilities will only be base load at best, and all that power fluctuation is going to go behind the meter. That's my prediction. And we built a power system for that. This is not a storage battery. This is a power battery. This is all about energy security, energy sovereignty. And I use energy sovereignty instead of energy security for a reason. You need to make sure you have power regardless of what the utility is doing. And you don't have the choice any longer to wait on the utility to figure out your problem and how you keep your business running. You need to invest in a system yourself. And I think as we invest in these systems, we can take advantage of DER programs and frequency reserve and all these programs that are out there. But the reality is this system runs no parallel sync. I am grid follow, grid forming all the time. I don't need the grid. I need another power source of any type. We will take any type of electron. Wind, solar, SMR, the utility, it doesn't matter to me. I'm stripping the value of the electron at the best price point, the best efficiency, the best CO2 that meets my standard of what I want. I'm informing my own grid behind the meter, and I'm making my own sovereign decision of how to run my business, independent of what the utility says. That gives me the freedom to know my revenue is secured because I have guaranteed my own sovereignty of power. And the name of the game today is sovereignty of your own power. If you don't have sovereignty of your own power, you have no guarantee of your revenue. And if we truly get to 100 times worse by 2030, you will have businesses failing right and left because you cannot sustain power outages every other day as a business. You can as maybe a small restaurant, you can maybe a small retail shop, but manufacturing, which drives this country, Silicon Valley, which drives this country, computer systems, the AI, they will not be able to sustain these kind of outages in the future. They are going to move to energy sovereignty. Energy sovereignty is going to change the game of the utility. And the utilities, in my opinion, are asleep at the wheel at this because they have this big behemoth that they've developed, which is an asset institute that has guaranteed returns, and they're looking for now, with what's happening with bring your own power, the crumbling of that system. They are going to have to reach behind the meter now to maintain their revenues, to maintain the infrastructure of the system. They're going to have to work better. And with this system of what we've developed, we don't need the huge interconnection studies. I put the system in and I say to the utility, you tell me your ramp rates. You tell me the volt var ride-throughs that you want. I'll program it into my sequence of operations and I'll use you whenever you tell me I can use you by your definition. You don't have to ask me about what I'm doing. I got my stuff covered. So now I've created this nice independent relationship between me and the utility. So these 5 to 7 year lead times go away. I don't need a 3-year engineering study to figure out how to build a power plant and a substation for my facility. I can go, and when they get there, they get there. And we're happy with that. That's all I got.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. You really succeeded explaining the problem and the solution. So do we have any question? Don't be shy.
Thanks, James. Do you see any hesitations in clients having these on-site power resources?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hesitation, and the hesitation is really the owning and operating and maintaining these systems, because effectively you're building a small power plant on your property. And what we're seeing a transition from, we were doing OEM sales of these products for a long time, and now people are really asking us to really be like a miniaturized IPP. We also have a gigawatt project that we're working on, which will be a major IPP type of project, but they want you to really come in and just give them almost like the utility. What's my cost per kilowatt? I'm willing to do a take or pay associated with that, but I really don't want to be liable for this. We have added to this an insurance component. So we're actively working on insuring these electrons to 5 nines of uptime, because we are working on a system that gives us 7 nines of view into the system uptime, so we can guarantee 5 nines of uptime. We will then insure that product. The utility today does not insure that product. What they say is, oh, if it's an act of God, any fault, squirrel, rabbit, it doesn't matter. If it takes me down, I'm not paying you anything. You have to prove I caused your problem at your facility. That's the current modus operandi of the utility system. This is different. If we detect an issue, we're going to send a notification saying, hey, we've detected an issue, it needs fixed. But with this, we have the reliability built in there. We can clear faults in under a second without you going down. We can go 0 to 100% in 5 milliseconds to cover these massive fluctuations in power. We can handle a 90% load drop. The load drop for people in power understands that's much more complicated than applying power. Because think of a freight train trying to stop on a dime, that's what load drop is. It's very difficult to do that.
Thanks, James. If your technology allows you to get to 7 nines, just kind of curious, does that just as a pure technology offering something you would present to other people doing behind the meter power that are in the ecosystem, or are you more like an all service IPP that the entire solution? Do you ever partner up? Or are you looking to do that?
Yeah, we partner up with everybody, right? So we're not going to be as everything. I'm not going to service turbines. I'm not going to service engines, but what we create is an LLM with AI associated with, these are the loads, what happens on the load. This is all the components within the system. So all those components have data, machine analytics. We also then put environmental sensors on the outside of the machine analytics so that we have all this information. We also are a CSP in the US in all the markets. So as a CSP, we get the feed of what's happening on the utility side as well with weather. So with these analytics of what we predict the load is going to do, what we predict the supply is going to do, what we predict all the components within the supply train are going to do, we can now get to these failure modes and real visual line of sight. We're not going to have equipment to get us to 7 nines like you would think. So an N+1 environment with 2 buses that get you to 5 nines is the standard. The extra 2 nines are to do the predictive analytics to tell us how we're going to maintain 5 nines all the time. So when I say 7 nines, it really is to maintain in perfect harmony the 5 nines of uptime of the entire power stream.
Sorry, could you repeat it?
What's the competitive market like for your business, and are there any utilities that recognize themselves as the new Ma Bells and are trying to catch up a little bit?
I think, so far, what I would tell you is, I think the most progressive I've seen is Georgia Power. And Georgia Power is trying to take systems like ours and put them on their side of the meter in relationship with agreements with the customer that they have access to that power if there's any issues going on. So from a progressive standpoint, I would say Georgia Power is probably, and they also have very good rules in Georgia of how they own the power. So I think they have a much better appetite to doing this than some of the other utilities. But I think all the utilities are starting to recognize if they have these pockets of power that are out there that they want to take use of, the name of the game right now is time to power. And the reality is you can get power in 24 months, you're going to get business. And that's kind of the seat that we sit in right now. Access to the generation equipment and our equipment allows us to get power on the ground in 24 months. And you're 4 years at probably best shot at a utility level. So our ability to monetize their excess capacity in that 1,250 gigawatts is driving customers to us right now.
Thank you so much, James. Congratulations. This is
All right, thank you.